Welcome back to Griffonomics, where we conduct financial investigations to define the risk before we look at the reward. Now, while our focus is often on portfolio protection, today we're tackling maybe the highest stakes risk of all, the risk of a complete public meltdown during an on-the-spot moment.
It's those moments, isn't it? The spontaneous ones, that unexpected Q&A after you've nailed a presentation, or a cold call from a senior leader, maybe an impromptu request for feedback. They just feel so much harder than a rehearsed pitch.
Exponentially harder. They're high stakes because there's no script, and that internal pressure just makes your mind seize up.
It does.
Exactly. So our sources this week, they dive deep into this fascinating methodology from an expert communicator, Matt Abrahams. And he views spontaneous speaking not as some, innate talent you're just born with.
But it's not magic.
Not at all. It's a skill, a rigorous skill you can actually engineer. And that's really the core thesis we're unpacking for you. Effectiveness in these high-pressure moments, it all comes down to two interlocking pillars. First, managing your internal mindset, and second, constructing your external messaging.
And that internal mindset piece is, well, it's where we absolutely have to start. If you look at the human brain, the real challenge is overcoming that primal threat response.
Of fight or flight.
The fight or flight, yeah. Because that biological reaction, it instantly hogs all the cognitive bandwidth we need for clarity, for just formulating a thought.
So if we can't stabilize the body, if we can't calm the brain down, it doesn't matter how brilliant our messaging is. We'll just freeze before we even get a word out.
Precisely. The methodology we're looking at is basically a 6-step roadmap. And, the first 4 steps are all about getting your head right before you even open your mouth.
Okay, so let's start with anxiety management, because this is a universal struggle, right?
It really is. The research shows something like 85% of people admit to feeling intense nervousness in these situations.
Which is actually kind of comforting. It means if your palms are sweating when you get handed the mic, you're normal.
Yeah.
But I want to zero in on a point the research made. Anxiety isn't just about your discomfort. It actually costs the audience.
Oh, absolutely. When a speaker is visibly nervous, rushing their words, hands shaking, the audience gets uncomfortable, they get distracted, they call it secondhand anxiety.
Secondhand anxiety, I like that. So you're forcing your listener to focus on your symptoms, not your substance.
Exactly. So managing your own anxiety is really an act of service to your listeners. It lets them focus on your message.
That's a great reframe. So let's get tactical. How do we attack this? It seems like there's a two-pronged approach, dealing with the physical symptoms and then the psychological sources.
Right. On the physiological side, the goal is just to counteract that immediate fight or flight. Stress hits, your heart rate spikes, you start breathing shallowly, and it all just compounds the panic. The best hack for this is deep belly breathing.
Okay, but it's not just any deep breath. The advice is really specific, isn't it? Take a deep breath where the exhale is twice as long as the inhale. Why is that double-length exhale so important?
Because that long exhale, it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system through something called the vagus nerve. That's the rest and digest system. Do that 2 or 3 times, and you are physically telling your brain you're not being chased by a tiger.
So it brings the heart rate down, stops you from rushing. That's actionable. And what about for people who have more visible symptoms? The blushing, the sweating.
That's your blood pressure and body temp spiking. Your hands are actually excellent thermo-regulators. So the simple hack is to hold something cold. A bottle of water, a chilled can, whatever. That cooling in your palms can really help bring down the sweating and blushing. Simple, effective, and totally discreet. Okay, so let's pivot to the psychological source. What's kicking all this off in the first place?
It usually boils down to what they call future-oriented goal obsession. We're not nervous about the words we're saying right now. We're worrying about the outcome. Will I get the job? Will they like my idea? Will this be perfect?
And that worry just pulls us completely out of the present moment. So the fix is to force ourselves back into the present. How do we do that?
You need a cognitive distraction. Something that demands so much focus, it starves the anxiety. The examples in the research are, well, they're not easy. And that's the point. Try counting backwards from 100 by 17s.
By 17s. Okay, that would be genuinely difficult. I mean, I'd have to use 100% of my brain for that. There'd be no room to worry about anything else.
Precisely. If you're calculating 83, 66, 49, you're using your working memory so intensely that the anxiety just can't get a foothold. Another one, which also warms up your voice, is reciting a really complex tongue twister. Something like, I slit a sheet I slit, and on that slitted sheet I sit. Okay, so let's unpack the next step in this mindset phase, because It's wonderfully counterintuitive. It's called maximize mediocrity. So we've tamed the body, we've distracted the mind. Why would striving for perfection actually hurt our performance?
It's what they call the bandwidth problem. Think of your brain like a computer. The main program is your speaking program. But if you're also running all these background apps, self-judgment, internal evaluation, trying to come up with the most brilliant answer ever.
Then the main program freezes or lags.
Exactly. You stammer, you get a complete mental block by giving yourself explicit permission to just answer the question, to be good enough, or even mediocre.
You're essentially closing that self-judgment app.
You are. You're turning down the volume on that internal critic. And paradoxically, by freeing up all those mental resources, you suddenly have the processing power to actually formulate a much better response.
So you maximize mediocrity to get closer to greatness. I love that.
It's a powerful shift. And that leads right into reframing the interaction itself. When we feel threatened, we get defensive, our answers are short, our tone is harsh, we try to make ourselves small.
So how do we shift that defensive posture?
We have to stop seeing the interaction as a threat or an attack and start seeing it as an opportunity. A gift, really. A chance to connect, to clarify, to collaborate. That change in perspective, it softens everything.
But what about when you genuinely mess up? You use the wrong word or state an incorrect fact. How do you stop from spiraling then?
That's a crucial question. The methodology makes a big distinction between reflection and rumination. Rumination, obsessing over the mistake right now, is fatal. So you borrow the next play mentality from coaching legend Coach K. You fumble a sentence, you move on immediately to the next one. Reflection is for later.
And viewing those mistakes not as failures, but as mistakes.
Correct. Like a film director. Take one was flawed, but you don't cancel the movie. You just make take two better. It dramatically lowers psychological stakes.
So we've managed our internal state. The mindset phase is done. And that brings us to the bridge between our internal world and our external message. The art of deep listening.
And this is where most communication just fails. The reason is simple. We listen just enough to get the gist of the question, and then we immediately start rehearsing our own brilliant response.
And that leads to these huge mistakes. You mentioned something called a categorical error. What does that look like?
A categorical error is when you completely misunderstand what's needed. So say a colleague wants to vent, they need emotional support. But you weren't really listening, so you jump in with constructive feedback. You misdiagnose the ailment. You gave advice when they just needed you to listen.
So the fix for that has to be an active listening strategy.
The one proposed is called pace, space, and grace. Pace is just consciously slowing down, taking a pause before you respond. Space is creating the mental and physical room to be present. Put your phone down, turn towards them.
And
Grace is about intuition. It's paying attention to how they're speaking, not just the words. Their nonverbals, their tone. That's where the real meaning often is.
And the most powerful tactic that pulls all of this together is tactical. Paraphrasing. You're just repeating the crux of their point back to them.
Yes, and the mechanism here is fascinating. Paraphrasing is a lower-order cognitive skill.
Yeah.
Meaning it's easy. It doesn't use up a lot of that precious prefrontal cortex bandwidth.
So it buys you time.
It buys you critical thinking time. You're validating the other speaker, making them feel heard, and you're simultaneously formulating your own structured answer, all without rambling.
That is the perfect bridge. Okay, we've managed our internal state. We've listened. Now we shift to phase two, messaging, the external output. And the key idea here is that the human brain is wired for story and structure, not for, a random list of facts.
Structure is absolutely vital. For you, the speaker, it's a recipe. You don't have to invent the flow from scratch. You just drop your points into the framework.
And for the audience.
For them, it's a tour guide. You give them expectations. You give them connective tissue so they don't get lost. A good speaker never loses their group.
So what's the go-to structure? One that works for almost any spontaneous situation.
The primary roadmap is the what, so what, now what framework. It provides instant, universal scaffolding for your message.
Okay, let's test it. How would that work in, say, an elevator pitch?
Easy. The what is your core idea. We're launching Project Atlas on time. The so what is why it matters to them. This means we can capture 15% market share next quarter. And the now what is the action. We need you to sign off on the marketing budget by EOD.
The so what is key there. It links the data to the listener's self-interest. Okay, how about for giving difficult feedback?
Works just as well. The what is the observation. I noticed the last 3 client reports had errors. The so what is the impact. This undermines client trust. The now what is the required action. Moving forward, every report needs to be proofed by two people. It's direct, structured, and focused.
That's incredibly versatile. But even with a great structure, people still tend to overtalk. Which brings us to the last step, focus.
Right. We have to remember the mantra, tell the time, don't build the clock. We overshare because we feel we need to prove how much work we did instead of just giving the answer.
So how do we enforce that kind of ruthless focus?
By setting a clear goal, using the no-feel-do model, before you speak, you take that moment you bought yourself and you determine three things.
What are those three things? Let's use an update on a project as an example.
Okay, first, what should the audience know? The information. The budget is 10% over. Second, how should they feel? The emotion. Concerned but confident it's contained. And third, what should they do? The action. Approve the emergency funding request. Focusing on those three outcomes keeps the message sharp.
This whole methodology, from breathing to structure, it really comes together with one powerful metaphor.
Let's tie it all together with the medical triage analogy. The entire framework basically mirrors how a professional medic works. You can't offer a treatment plan without a good diagnosis.
And the diagnosis is phase one. It's that deep listening. You have to listen until you sweat, as one source put it, to understand the audience's actual need.
And only when that diagnosis is complete do you move to the treatment plan. That's your structured messaging. The what, so what, now what framework. It's a clear, logical protocol so the audience feels safe and understands the path forward.
It provides clarity for the listener and I think really reduces the speaker's anxiety. You have a system.
It is a complete engineered system. And the final takeaway for you, the learner, is that mastery here requires a cycle of repetition, reflection, and feedback. And the true measure of your success isn't just your delivery, it's the transferability of your message.
Transferability, that's a great concept.
Yes, is your message structure so clear and focused that the listener can easily go and retell your story to someone else? Can that hiring manager effectively pitch you to their team? If they can, you've succeeded.
That idea of passive influence, using structure so your listener becomes your storyteller,
Right.
that fundamentally changes how I think about preparing for these moments.
Speed. Risk defined. Portfolio protected.